for everyone, hi, I'm Abrar Rahman. The CEO, founder. I graduated from Berkeley, maybe like 3 years ago. So, coming out of school, my mom really wanted me to work a 9 to 5, and I did for, for the first chunk of that time. But,
Hmm.
you know, being in the startup world, right? It's pretty intense, and also, there are good days, there are bad days. It's a roller coaster. So my
Yeah.
mom really, really wanted me to work a 9 to 5. So
Yeah.
I think I've started a company in spite of what my parents do, but not because of it. Um,
Oh, nice. So, okay, so that was the inspiration. Now, I'm curious too, because from what I read, you said it was really personal for you to be. This is a very particular field that you're in. What really drive that decision for you to
oh yeah,
create?
of course. So I think medical bills in this country are just such a disaster, right? You look at a country like Singapore, and only 6% of their GDP goes to healthcare. In the United States, it's 18%. There's 25 administrators and back office people for every one doctor or nurse in this country. The amount of administrative bloat is ridiculous, but everybody knows that, right? Like,
Yeah.
when it comes down to the human impact, right? I had a
Mhm.
close friend with cancer, and I don't think in the 2 or 3 years of her treatment, her parents looked at a single medical bill. I've talked to hundreds of providers, and it's like, if they feel like they don't understand what they're reading in their medical bills, then
Mm,
if you're Gloria 57, work at an Amazon warehouse, there's so many people in this country who are first generation immigrants, and
yeah.
you really shouldn't need like a PhD to understand what you're getting charged for. It's so unfair.
Yeah.
And that's why so many excess charges can be passed on to, you and me, and the American people are paying an extra $60 billion in, bogus or erroneous charges. And
Hmm.
I mean, in addition to just being a big market, if you want to think about it in more more capitalist terms, it's also just such a huge human problem that I think is, no one's really found a way to crack it yet.
Yeah, agreed. One big challenge in healthcare is price transparency. From your vantage, what are the biggest obstacles you see in getting hospitals or providers to share accurate, comparable pricing information?
So in 2022, there was a law passed called the No Surprises Act. So,
Yes.
the large hospital systems are legally obligated to release some of that information. And if you've
Hmm.
ever tried to actually look through it, it's this like big complicated CSV file or an XML file, and it's just so convoluted, right? Like there are a couple companies out there that, literally all they do is they take that information, they clean it up, and they sell that intelligence. But the fact that there even needs to be a middleman service tells you that, the law has only gotten us so far. And,
Yeah.
say what you will about the current administration, but they did just sign an executive order, asking, basically encouraging hospitals to find more ways of doing data interoperability. So,
Hmm.
things are at least trending the right direction, but maybe a little bit of background for how I thought this was like a good opportunity. Like, because of what my folks do, I have been in like a health AI researcher since I was in high school. That's when I published my first research papers, and I'd been at companies like Tesla and Amazon, and they didn't really capture the spark. And I did try to go kind of all the way the other direction, and I had my try at a nonprofit for a little bit. I
Hmm.
built out, the patient analytics dashboard intake system for a kidney hospital foundation in Bangladesh, and they're still using it, across 22 clinics. But ultimately, coming to, in the U.S., this is my home, is where I'm born and raised. I thought there are
Yeah.
plenty of problems to solve on the homeland, right? So,
Right.
I worked at a company called Epic Systems, which, if you guys don't know, is this gigantic behemoth in Wisconsin. They have your medical records, I guarantee it, because they have 90% of the market for like basically health software. It's the operating system for Stanford and Kaiser and Beth Israel
Yeah.
and literally everyone, right? So when I was there, I got a really great top-down view into how, I think, not only how to sell into these systems, but also like, how complicated and entrenched and old school a lot of healthcare, and especially the billing side, is in the United States. And
Mm.
um, something that was really inspiring to me. I have I have a cousin who started a business like called Levels.fyi, and it's it's a lot like Glassdoor, right? They take salary information. They ask people to just like upload what they have, and they've created this gigantic data set, and it lets them publish insights, and it lets them help people with negotiations and all of these services on top. And I really thought that was super interesting, right? Like, okay,
Yeah.
like there's no standardized database of this, but we as the American people, we have the information. Someone just needs to create the right, the right ecosystem, the right platform, and the stories will come out. So obviously medical billing is sensitive information. It's a way further uphill battle.
Hmm.
But that I was just thinking, hey, if someone could just do Glassdoor for medical bills, like that would change lives. That would be a generational company.
Yeah. That absolutely. So with that, I'm curious, is your primarily focused on B2B or B2C? Because I know it's a software system, and I'm just curious to how the accessibility would be on both ends.
Totally. We always have the patient at the heart, right? So if you were to interact with the tool, it looks a lot like Rocket Money or maybe a Mint Mobile. It's you just kind of scroll through and all your transactions kind of go in there. All you have to do is upload a picture, or if
Okay.
your insurance works with us, then it'll happen automatically. But yeah, that way, we can identify, oh, these are the line items that we think are problematic. And ultimately, there is this kind of grassrootsy thing going on where we're collecting all of these patient stories, and
Right.
really that's where our unique advantage is, right? Is like there's a lot of there's a lot of people out there that are just cleaning up the government disclosure data, and not many people are actually asking like, okay, what did someone like you pay at the same hospital last week, which is
Yeah.
ridiculous, right? That's the simple thing, right? But in terms of how we actually distribute, we would probably go through your insurer. Like I've thought a lot about like, can we just make this as a direct consumer product? And
Mhm.
some of our competitors are trying, but it's really, really expensive to do that kind of just like, just advertising to the masses. And especially for something like this, right? You'll see that, someone uploads one bill for one big surprise that they had, and they'll never use the tool again, right? In startups, we call that churn, and it's the death knell of many a consumer business. So I think it's a little stickier if, we're able to kind of tell your insurance, well, hey, if you're a smaller insurer, like a community health provider in rural Texas or West Virginia, like that's
Mhm.
kind of the kinds of people that we would sell to.
Yeah.
They don't have this like kind of top-down pricing power of a Blue Cross or an Aetna. So,
Mhm.
there's a big opportunity to help them lower the itemized, see, they don't want to pay that shit either, right? To excuse
Right.
my French, right?
No, you're
Um,
good.
so, I think in healthcare, you always got to think about this patient, provider, payer triangle. That promise that's not an Illuminati symbol. That's just, but in all seriousness, right? Like if you try to fight everyone, you try to make a pure play patient advocate, and you fight the insurance on denials, and you fight your doctor on the billing, reduction side. Like you're just outnumbered. I don't care how good your technology is, right? It's just never gonna work unless you got the right allies. And
Yeah.
I'm alluding to recent events, but I think insurance could really use, some good PR right now. And ultimately, they're not always the bad guys, right? Like maybe there's good people working at those places, and
Yeah.
yeah, we'll see what we can do, right? This is obviously a pretty big problem, and we're only a year and a half into our journey, and yeah, but that's kind of how I think about where our next couple of months is going to look like.
Right. And what would you say is surprisingly working for you guys right now at this time in the business?
Yeah, I think a big surprise has been, um, like I think that a lot of folks, like almost every single person that I've talked to tells me I would use this service tomorrow, right?
Okay.
So I really thought like, okay, maybe this is going to be something that really works for a specific group of people. Like maybe the elderly, they have a lot of bills coming in, or if you're like
Hmm.
a cancer patient, or you recently had an ER stay. But what I'm finding is that, like a lot of injuries or disabilities are invisible, right? Like you just look around in the crowd, and maybe that 20-year-old marathoner had a recent stay, right? Like
Hmm.
the universality of health problems, I think is something that I had really underestimated. Is like this could
Yeah.
touch a lot more lives than I had initially considered, which is,
Right.
like heavy as the head, right? It is a little bit daunting, right? But it also just means that, even if we're not able to convert everyone, like there's enough people out there that need this thing that, it's worth continuing and on this process and going and climbing the mountain.
Right. And just to circle back, correct me if I'm wrong here, or just clarification. I understand the incentive for the patients to obviously want this transparency for billing. When you look at the research, it says only, I believe, 4% of people actually file claims to their wrongful medical billing. And like I think 70 to 80% of them come back. What am I looking for? Like they come back. What's the word when
Like
they?
successful, they get the money back.
Sorry,
Yeah. No,
I'm
you're
sorry.
still
I'm
good.
having an off day.
Psalms, I think your numbers are more or less accurate. I've heard, I've seen reports that an even lower percentage of people file those
Yeah,
appeals, but the 70 to 80% success rate is true, right? Which is why it's like, holy moly, like so many people just simply don't have the time to be on the phone with the billing department for 4 hours, right? Like it's so uphill battle. It takes like 3 to 9 months sometimes in order to get through one of these. And ultimately, it's as simple as data output, right? Like there's so many intermediaries in the middle, but I think that with how smart these systems are getting, and also how rule-based the space is, right? Like you don't need to solve AGI in order to make this thing work, right?
yeah,
But increasingly, the technology has caught up to the problem, and I think a lot of these back office workflows that introduce so much friction and so much headache can be a lot faster. And obviously that's good for the system, but it could be really, really good for individual patients if someone puts in the work to make it happen.
right. Because I initially thought, well, why would healthcare providers want to implement this system if they are technically benefiting from? I mean, are they cognizant of them benefiting from the wrongful billing? Like, who gets, who reaps those rewards from that? You know what I mean? So if this system is supposed to help the patient, what is the incentive for the actual hospitals and the clinics to want to adapt it?
So the short answer is very little, which is why we sell to insurance and not directly to the providers. But I,
Okay.
I just want to stress, like, I don't think your doctor is evil, right? Not necessarily, but there's
Yeah.
just the system that all of us work in, right?
Yeah.
So, since Obamacare, there's this system called RVUs. And what that basically means is that your doctor has to hit a certain quota of how many bills and procedures they do. In fact, they don't get their bonus unless they hit those numbers, and they're going to get yelled at
Okay.
by their bosses, right? It's
Okay.
it's pretty interesting, right? And there are actually a lot of hospitals that systematically underbill, right? Like Stanford Medical
Mhm.
has so much money that they can just like they could take a loss on a lot of these, right? They won't really press you on collections. They'll be nicer because they just have so many people coming in the door. But obviously that's not everyone, right? So insurance is the group that actually has the same incentive as us, is like they want to see the number of those like itemized like billing line items, everything on the menu, so to speak, right? They want to see all that come down, right? Because they're the ones who ultimately have to pay it directly, not you,
Yeah.
right? So that's kind of unintuitive, right? Is like you
Yeah.
would think that you would think that there is no kind of baked in incentive to do this. And
Right.
so your doctor doesn't have to be evil. They're just playing the RVU game, right? And it means that if there's going to be always a little bit of kind of waste, fraud, abuse, or just accidental stuff that happens. And no
Mhm.
matter no matter how good technology gets, like those incentives will never change. Like we will always have a business, and there are always going to be people to help.
Right. Exactly. With recent CMS regulations requiring hospitals to post standard charges, how effective have you found these rules in actually helping patients, and where do you see gaps that Dorsal Dorsal is filling?
Yeah, I mean, I think these things are so early, right? So I'm not gonna render like a very wide judgment on them. It's certainly a
Okay.
step in the right direction, though.
Right.
Um, that being said, right, like how often before you do a procedure are you actually thinking about the price, right? It's
Mhm.
normally like you just end up somewhere, right? And so a lot of this is going to be helpful for what we call elective procedures, right?
Okay.
Like I want to get my stomach clipped because I'm obese, or, I want to get plastic surgery or something dermatology, like these kinds of optional things, that's where there's a lot more kind of shopping before the point of sale, which is, again, I think it's a step in the right direction, right? So that's why our platform, what's really exciting about it is how end to end it all is, right? Like, yes, we're taking some of this data and kind of putting it out into the world and letting you explore it. And some people will definitely get direct value out of using that to inform their care needs. But for us, it's more of a awareness thing, right? It's like
Mhm.
Americans are so apathetic. They don't think these numbers are out there. And if each hospital has these numbers individually, it's still like really, really painful to make comparisons or just kind of like get a sense of like, okay, how does this, what other options might I have, or like what does it look like in the rest of the country? Like, is this really, fair? Or even if it doesn't seem fair, like what else might be going on? Like, there's just so much other context that you can layer on top that I think that at least our public facing thing, like they will always have some kind of value to it. But I
Mhm.
think in terms of what's going to really make the money, it'll probably be some of that after the point of sale appeal stuff where, you don't have to even pay a subscription, right? Like if it works, you keep like 80, 90%, and we'll just take a little haircut off the top.
Mhm.
So, I think what's great about that model is it's forced to work, right? Like
Right.
I'm not going to make money off just like signups or wait lists or, yeah, I mean, I have to actually work for you in order to get paid, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I don't know. I'm optimistic things are going to go in the right direction, but um, just because the numbers are out there doesn't mean that people are going to use it to fight. That it's still like, whether you're an investment banker or you're a warehouse worker, like so few people have the time, the expertise, the chip on their shoulder to go through and actually, like jump through all these hoops. And if you're really sick, you have bigger things to worry about, man. Like it's that's why I think that like, what I've heard called like tech-enabled services or vertical AI is like that's where so much of the opportunity is just like there's stuff that nobody wants to do that is just so baked in from a legal, regulatory, and just like, so many hoops to jump through because of how many stakeholders there are. And,
Yeah.
medical bills is definitely one of those. And yeah, that's why like I think you do need AI to step in at some point because otherwise like someone would have built this in 2010 and it just, we haven't gotten there yet. So.
Yeah. Absolutely. And before I ask you one of my closing questions, I asked you earlier, what do you find surprisingly working right now? Now I'm curious to know what is one of the main challenges you're finding when it comes to scaling?
Oh man, yeah, I could go on for hours about this one. Uh, so for the first year or so of working on this business, I thought we were going to go direct to consumer, right? It just seems like the obvious thing is like, okay, let me make an iPhone app and you download it and it just works, right? And, I think the math ends up not working out, right? I think, getting really technical, the LTV over CAC, right? The lifetime value per patient of like how much I can squeeze out of them, how many times they're going to use it
Mm,
over the customer acquisition cost, right? How expensive is it to get patients one by one? And how many of those are going to stick around, right? The churn issue, right? So I spent a lot of time circling like how do I get other partners, other businesses to kind of work with me? And I think for the longest time I was like, well, doctors aren't evil. Like there has to be some way to sell this as like a patient engagement tool or something that improves care adherence and like, someone shows up for more labs or like, gets more vaccines or whatever, than normal because they have less distrust with their provider. And ultimately, I spent months and months trying to actually make that sale. And it wasn't until, I had a recent team member join that I realized, well, insurance is where the money angle lines up. So even if they're not like the sexiest employee sorry, the sexiest customer to reach out to, like I think there's tremendous opportunity in doing that. And we have already had, kind of a lot of traction in that front in the last couple of months. So that
mm,
big change was we brought on a guy who basically used to be the CMO of Cigna Medicaid. So
okay,
really,
nice.
really senior up there, and he's been working as a internist for the last 25 years. He's a professor at UT. Has worked at basically every managed care org in the state of Texas. His name's Dr. Emron Ralph, and he joined the team about a couple months ago. Started as a sales call. I reached out to his org and was like, hey, like, can we do this with you guys? Like, can we help address some of your pain points? Like, and he, about like 10 minutes, 15 minutes in the call, he interrupts me. He goes, Abrar, this is seems like a good idea. I could may or may not be able to get this set up in my own practice, but I want in. Let me get a stake. Let me see if I can make some sales for you. And it's been great. Having him on the team is really refined. Like, how do we how do we make that sale, right? So, um, all in all, I think learning that consumer healthcare sucks, right? Like, even if I want to work directly with the patient, and you have to get creative about how you get those patients. Otherwise, you're going to need to raise like $50 million and burn half of it on getting customers in the first place, right? I want to be a little bit more efficient, lean with it. So, that's why we're going through our current strategy. But, definitely something difficult that I had to learn by trial by fire.
Yeah, no, it's definitely reminds me of some just conversations I've had this week with two doctors. One is the founder of Skin IO, and the other one's a founder of genetics. Oh, it's ADX Health. So it seems similar in in the sense of like they do B2B also, but they also do have B2C. And it's such a peculiar, like you said, getting people to use it again, over again, and having that repetition. It does sound harder when it comes to business to consumer, but not impossible. I don't know. I'm not gonna act like, sorry, I hit my thing. I'm not gonna got too excited over here. I'm not gonna act like I know. But in terms of the getting the clients, when it comes to the sales and stuff, do you find it when you say it's like, spending 50 mil, whatever, it's really challenging. Is it challenging in the sense because of the ads and the systems and like literally getting in contact, or what is it specifically that is challenging about it?
Well, Sams, I don't have all the answers either. I'm 24, right? But
Yeah,
so what I've learned is that, like, ads are. I mean, of course, ads are not cheap, right? Advertising is a
right.
huge business, right? So that's obviously a part of it, right? But I think what's the most challenging about consumer sales is that trends don't last forever, right? Like,
Mm,
we got these Labubus and Dubai chocolate, and I for guarantee you next year people will forget it, right? I
yeah,
I remember when people were dropping like $600 on off-white sweaters, and during
yeah,
the Virgil Abloh era. And I mean, we don't even have to talk about Yeezys. Like, what a crazy rise and fall was that business for Adidas, right?
yeah.
So I think in general, right, like, consumers are really frothy, right? Like, what we
Mhm.
think about and what we remember is difficult, right? Like, and even the mighty fall, right? Like, even I'm personally bullish on Google, but a lot of people think that, like, ChatGPT is going to take a real dent out of them. And so, in order to get really sticky, right? I want dorsaling to be like this obvious next step that people take after going to the doctor. Just
Right.
like Googling something is it's like a verb. It's so common,
Yeah,
right?
exactly, exactly.
So, in order to get that, right? Like, I think because it's not something as immediate as search, right? It's not so obvious, right? Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, eventually you will be able to just search for bills on my
Mhm,
platform, right? So
mhm.
there are some parallels, right? But um,
Yeah,
you know, ultimately, the one thing that is pretty sticky is, people don't change insurance very often. People, live in the same place, go to the same doctor, sometimes for all of their lives. And that
yeah,
hospital is not going to get rebuilt a couple years down the line, right? Like, these systems are more stable, right? So if you can, my hope is that if I can combine some of this, consumer energy, and get just kind of getting people from all walks of life to embrace using this and get real value, and really see their finances and their perspective on healthcare
yeah,
completely transformed. And like, that's my goal. That's always going to be what I want to do.
right,
And if I can make a ton of money along the way, like, that's great, but that's really
yeah,
not like it's about providing value to people. And
mhm,
you know, ultimately, there's a lot of other folks that want to see patients do better, and
yeah,
identifying those right partners and getting that stickiness is really, really tough. I think if you're like
yeah,
if you're like a medical device, it's obvious who your customers are. If you're, if you're like I think just in like an API, just pure software, it's easier to figure out who your customers are. When you're a tech-enabled business and you're kind of trying to fit your way into how many different intermediaries and third parties there are in healthcare, like it's a lot messier, which is why it's
Yeah.
taken us a little bit of time to build conviction on what we want to do and who we want to work with. But I think
Yeah.
we're there yet, or we're there at this time. We'll see.
Yeah. Yeah, sounds like it. And if you could wave a magic wand and money and time wasn't a factor, what's one thing you would solve right now?
One thing I would solve right now is just getting it into people's hands. We're bootstrapping so far. We are actively raising for anyone out there who might be in the investment community, but um, I would say that there's just a lot of legal that gets in the way of making a healthcare company.
Mm,
There's this law called HIPAA, which is about your data and your data and its privacy and security and things like that. There's also other standards that you need for a B2B business, like one's called SOC 2. There's other ones that you can get to make your business really shiny, like ISO or like high trust. And none of this is cheap. Some of them involve continuous monitoring, and even though tools like Vanta and Drata make it a lot cheaper than it used to be, like even 5, 10 years ago, it's still a process. So if I
mm-hmm,
could make compliance go away like that, that would be one thing. And I think
mm,
another thing that if I had infinite money that I would do is, um, I would probably buy a small billing company to move some of that in-house so that there's like kind of less things that I have to pass on to other stakeholders and kind of own, the whole vertical integration is what they call it in business school, right? But that would make it significantly simpler for me to make this service work. And,
yeah,
also, I think if we raise sufficient money, I am going to do that, right? Like it's not
yeah,
impossible. Um, and, in addition to that, because, I think well, it's so quick to build software in 2025 with all these new tools that have come out, like,
hmm,
my team is not limited by the speed of like software development. We're
yeah,
limited by the speed of the feedback that we get. We sell to
okay,
these large, old, established businesses. It takes 2 weeks to get an email back sometimes, right? Like we can work a lot faster than that, and if we just owned one of them, it would be a lot quicker for sure, right? Um, Final thing is I think, just getting the good word out there, right? Like even though we're primarily, thinking about doing a B2B play, if I had infinite money, then let's just get this to everyone like tomorrow.
right,
Right?
right,
Easier said than done, right? Like you definitely need a human in the loop, um, but our software works right now, right? Like it's not just money, right? Like there's obviously some more fine tuning we got to do before we scale this up, but um,
yeah.
money helps.
And are there insurances right now that you're working with already, or are you guys still
It's still kind of in
merging?
stealth. I would say there's kind of 3 or 4 plans that are, that Dr. Ralph like worked with their leaders at past roles. So like we have some really friendly alpha sites coming on, and then once we're able to kind of validate that model, I think that's when we're going to really blitz our target market is probably around Q1 of next year if all goes
Okay,
smoothly. But yeah, so we do already have some design partners kind of lined up, and um, just got to do right by them, right? No reason
right.
to rush out and try to get a million customers. Let's make the thing work first.
Yeah. That sounds valid. So, in a world where technology often evolves faster than our ability to adapt, what advice would you offer to health and wellness professionals seeking to integrate AI into their practices, ensuring they not only keep up pace, but lead the way in innovation?
Of course, yeah. I think the first thing I would do is really take a long, hard look in the mirror and think, does this really need AI? Do my customers want AI in this, or is
Mm,
this just something that I'm doing for keeping up with the Joneses because I feel like
mhm,
it's the thing to do? Um,
mm,
I think, just you talk to people who work at these AI companies and they'll try to sell you a bridge, right? Like they believe in the infinite potential of these things, and some of it's going to work, some of it isn't, right? But like there are applications where where it makes sense, and there are applications where it may not, right? And you have to do a little bit
yes.
of experimentation, and I think just accepting that ultimately do what your customers want, right?
Yeah.
Like um, if you think it's gonna like you have to, ultimately business is business, right? Like if it, helps with your EBITDA, right? If it helps improve your margins, if it helps with customer acquisition or keeping those customers on board, or
Mhm.
then, or if it's something that you're getting requested by your customers to work on, do that. Do that. Make sure you hire smartly. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to go get someone from Berkeley or Stanford like myself, right? It just means that you have to get someone who has worked in AI maybe longer than the last 2, 3 years, and
Mhm.
isn't just chasing the hype wave, but knows the limitations of the technology well.
Mhm.
You want a builder and not someone who's on like an AI vacation, so to speak, right?
Okay.
And yeah, and I would say the final thing, like, I talked a little bit about the implementation side, and now I'm switching gears to more of the innovation side. Um, I, get creative. That sounds like the most lazy advice out there, but it's a broad question, right? But I just think that, like you have to, if you really, really want to know what's going on, don't follow press releases. Those are always 6 to 10 months late. Read research papers, right? Then you'll figure out what is actually going to be possible and that you could turn into a product in a couple of years,
Yeah.
right? There are so many brilliant people working in academia that have no idea how to convert the great things that they're building into a business. So as an entrepreneur in health and wellness, if you really know your people, you'll be able to, if you put in the time to be able to read these really technical works, and stay away from the Forbes articles that are written by people who don't know what they're talking about, right?
Yeah.
If you can go straight to the primary source, then you'll have a massive leg up. You'll be able to see where things are going.